We are going to continue on water and rocks. This is the second week. This will be our last week on this subject. And we're going to continue on because I really felt that we didn't cover it adequately enough last week. We're going to take one more run at it and try to extract some additional truth from this subject. But I'm going to take us back to Psalms chapter 95, verse 7 through verse 11. This is the text that we opened with last week. In verse 7 it says, "For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did as Meribah, and as you did that day as Massah in the desert, where your fathers tested and tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was angry with that generation, and I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared on an oath in my anger, they will never enter my rest." Now we're going to jump to Psalms chapter 81, verse 7. And the psalmist picks it up again, this story. And the psalmist says in chapter 81, verse 7, "In your distress you called, and I rescued you. I answered you out of the thundercloud, and I tested you at the waters of Meribah." Now it's interesting because in this psalm, God is saying that I tested you at the waters of Meribah. We're having now a second reference to this place, Meribah, the waters of Meribah. Now, we're not going to read the story found in Exodus. This was the first occasion, and then followed up by a second occasion, which is in Numbers. We're not going to read those portions of scriptures we did last week, and you certainly can look it up and or go on our website and catch up by watching what we talked about last week. But if you'll remember that God is leading the children of Israel, he is leading them to the promised land. He is leading them to everything that he has promised them prophetically. And as they are traveling, as they're going and they're following God, how many of you remember they're following God by a pillar of fire by night and a pillar by day? They're following God. God is leading them, and God strategically leads them. First, found in Exodus, he leads them to a place that is called Rephidim. They fail the test there, and a short time later, he then leads them to a second place called Kadesh. Now, to us, as we read these two locations, they might not mean much to us because we, in our culture, we do not understand the meaning of the name. In this time, people were named specifically to denote their character or their personality. To us, we just throw a name out because it sounds nice. Bill, John, Sue. We never think, what could that name mean? And most of the time, it really doesn't mean much in our culture. But back at that time, Jacob was named Jacob because he was a supplanter. He was devious. He was conniving. He was a cheat. And that's what that name means. So he was named Jacob. You're a cheat. So anyway, that's how they named. They named cities like that, which denoted the character of the city, or it was named as something that God was going to do at that location. Does that make sense? All right. So God has led them now. He has led them to this place in Exodus first called Rephidim. He's led them there. And they get to Rephidim, and the first thing that they notice is that God has led them to a place where there is no water. There's no water in Rephidim. A whole nation is being led to Rephidim by the direction of God, but there is no water there. And of course, what do when they realize that there is no water? Is they begin to grumble. In fact, Exodus says, you put me to the test, but then in Psalms 81 said, I tested you there. And the test is they began to grumble against God, and the grumbling was this: can God supply water, and is God here? They failed. Moses went, the Bible says that God told Moses, go and hit the rock, and water will come out of the rock. So he hits the rock, and now mind you, you've got an entire nation traveling through the desert. This isn't a handful of people. So when he hits the rock, there has to be a river that gushed out of that giant rock. A river comes out. So okay, they failed. God gave them water anyway. So now we move on, and time goes on, and we come into the book of Numbers, and God has led them a second time to a place called Kadesh. And again, a second time, there is no water. Now you would think that they would have learned by now from the first time, but they haven't. And there again, a second time, they're in a town called Kadesh, and there is no water. So again, they grumble and they complain, only this time they're threatening to stone Moses for leading them there. Moses goes to God and said, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. These people are wanting to stone me. What am I supposed to do? And God says to Moses, he says, you go down to the big rock there, the giant rock. He said, and this time you take your staff, but you're not to hit the rock. I want you to speak to the rock. Don't touch it. Speak to it, because I will be standing there myself. So if you remember the story from last week, Moses goes to the rock, and instead of speaking to it, he takes his staff and he hits it not only once, but he hits it twice, and water flows out from the rock. Only God speaks to him, and God says, you have dishonored me. You've dishonored me by not esteeming me holy in this place. It's interesting. So let's back up. I'm going to try to break this down so it stays within categories. So let's back up. Let's go back to Exodus. The first time it happens, God has led them to Rephidim. Rephidim means rest. It means a place of rest. It means that you are here to rest. But they can't rest because they do not see water. So to them, the lack of water is speaking louder than what God has brought them to do and said, I will give you rest. So if God is going to give you rest and there is no water, you have to know that God is going to bring water. But all they see is a rock. They do not see the water embedded in the rock. They see a rock, God sees a river. So he's brought them to a place of rest, but they're saying, I cannot rest because I don't see water. Well, I think that's like most of our lives today. God has brought us to his place, a place of rest. He intends for us to rest, but we cannot rest because we're looking at what we don't have instead of what he will provide from what he has given us. I'm going to say that again. We focus on what we don't have instead of looking at what we do have that he will use to give us what we need. See, they didn't see water. All they saw was a rock. But within the rock, God saw a river. God leads them again in Numbers to Kadesh. They're now at Kadesh, and that name means the place of holiness. It is holy. It is God's dwelling place. And again, they don't see water. All they see is a rock. But this time, God says, you speak to it, Moses, because I am present, and you will esteem me holy to fulfill my word. And I will bring water from the rock. And the second time, it says, and the water will bring its own, the rock will bring its own water out. The first time, God was supplying the rock with water. The second time, the water was already in the rock. Did you catch that? The rock will bring its own water out. And God didn't say, I'm going to give it water. It had already been given to the rock before they got there. So God said it will bring its own water out. Wherever God leads you in life, He intends there to be rest, and He intends for Him to be holy there. Meaning that whatever you need isn't going to come. Whatever you need is already there. You might not see it. You might not know it's there, but it is there because God has led you there, and God doesn't lead you to a place to destroy you. You see a rock, and God sees a river. You see the rock, but God always sees what's inside the rock. If we could get that, our lives would dramatically change. I was thinking while I was driving here this morning, I had the thought going all the way back to the garden. And I said, God and I are having a conversation. And I said, God, you designed Adam a certain way, and therefore we're designed the same way. Adam was not created to worry. There isn't a mechanism in you that is there that gives you the ability to deal with anxiety. You weren't created for that. You were created to be in the garden, rest, and in a place of His holiness, His very presence. That's how you were created. That's how I was created. So when there isn't rest, our bodies don't know how to handle it. We do all kinds of crazy things. We get sick. We have mental, we do not know how to handle it because we're not equipped for it. God didn't create you for that. So God is always bringing you and me to a place of rest, to a place where He created us to be. Only that rest has to be in Him. He created you to rest. He has rest, and He's drawing you back into it. Always, at all times, no matter what you're going through, no matter where you're at, no matter what you're walking through, it doesn't matter. God is drawing you to rest. And in that, you have to know that He will supply all that you need there. You don't need to worry. The testing mentioned in Psalms is simply to see if they will stay in the place of rest. It's like this. God can lead you. God can lead you to a place of rest. God can lead you to Rephidim. God can lead you there, but He cannot make you stay there. Because in Rephidim, there will be things that will speak out to you. Situations will speak out to you. People will speak out to you. Rocks will speak out to you. And they will all tell you what you don't have and what you need to survive. And they will all tell you how you're going to die there. And what happens is this, it's at that time that God is testing you to see if you are going to move. Because it's at that time that most people will begin to pack up their stuff and they'll rent the U-Haul. And they will go their own direction instead of staying in the place that God has led them to. You see, in order for you to rest, there has to be an equal level of trust. You show me the man or the woman that says, I trust God, and I'll measure their level of trust in their ability to rest. To the level of trust is the level of rest. No trust, no rest. If I say to you, if I say to Michael, after church, I'm going to give you $10. And he trusts me, he will be relaxed, and he will sit there after church. Because he knows I said after church, I'm going to walk up and give you $10. I'm not, I don't have $10, but... And if I get busy over here talking to Pastor Joan, and he's sitting there, he's not going to worry or fret because he knows that when I'm done, I'm going to give him $10 because I'm a man of my word. He trusts me and he rests in it. But if he doesn't trust me, he's going to be, is he going to give me the $10? And I'm over here, remember me, 10. Remember? And he might get discouraged and get up and just walk out. And if he does, and I'm done talking to Pastor Joan, because remember, my time and his time might not be the same. Remember? 1,000 years to us is a day to him. He always comes through on time, but he doesn't necessarily do it on your time. So I'm not bound to his clock. I said, when I'm done, I'll give you the $10. And it might be when I'm done talking to Pastor Joan. It might be before, but it might not. It might be when I'm done. But you trust me that I'm going to give it to you. And if he trusts me, he will stay there. But if he doesn't trust me, he's going to end up walking away and moving on, and he will miss out on the $10. So to the level of trust will be the level of rest. If you are not resting, it is because you don't know how to trust. Because trust and rest go hand in hand. If you're all wound up about life, it's because you're not trusting the one whom you gave your life to. You don't trust his ability to help you and to navigate you and to bless you and to do all that. You don't trust him. And that's what causes you to be all worried and wound up about it, because there is no trust. Let me read Mark chapter 4, verse 35. It says, leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him, and a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. And Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion, and the disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? And he got up and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the waves, Quiet, be still. And the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? It could be said that he said to them, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no trust? So let's break down that story for a minute. Jesus gets in the boat and he tells them, let's go to the other side. He did not say we're going to drown and die. He said, let's go to the other side. Where he leads, he provides. Let's go to the other side. Meaning, I'm going to get you all there. But a squall comes up, and it begins to toss the sea, and the boat is taking on water. And what do the disciples see? The disciples see a boat that's filling with water. But it's interesting, the man who said, let's go to the other side, is what? He's sleeping in the stern. So, you have Jesus, the Prince of Peace, God Almighty, who created everything, who said we're going to the other side, and he's doing what during the storm? He's doing what anybody that has trust would do. He's unbothered by it. He's sleeping. But the disciples, what do they see? They see a storm and they see a boat taking on water. And they don't have the ability to rest because here's the key. The storm to them is speaking louder than Jesus. They're listening to the storm. They forgot what Jesus said. Jesus said, we're going to the other side. I don't care what happens. I'm just going to go to sleep because I know it's going to be okay because I'm taking us to the other side. They don't see that. What they see is a storm and a boat taking on water, and they're freaking out and they're panicking. It's ironic to me. The Prince of Peace is on the boat saying, I'm taking us to the other side. I'm God Almighty. They've already acknowledged that. He's asleep. If they trusted him, they themselves would also be asleep. You know, the devil will create swells in our life to get our attention. Oh, they don't have any power as long as the Prince of Peace is there and he said you can rest. They don't have power. They only have the power that to get your attention, and they only have power as long as your attention is on it. So the disciples went from Jesus is sleeping in a boat, I ought to take a nap too, we're all kind of tired, to oh my gosh, look at the waves, boats taking on water. Their attention was shifted, and when it shifted, the waves and the water in the boat spoke louder than Jesus. And when waves speak louder than Jesus, your trust is shifted, and you no longer trust the one who said it, and you're focused on the situation, and you have no rest. Did Jesus lead them to the boat? Yes. Was he leading them to the other side? Yes. But what got their attention? And had he not been there in physical form, they'd have probably all jumped overboard and tried to swim and drowned. There will always be swells in your life, and they have as much power as you give them attention. John chapter 14, verse 27 says this. Jesus said, peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I'm the guy that slept through the storm. My peace I give you. I do not give it to you as the world gives. What does he mean? Peace that the world gives is subject to the situation. Peace that the world gives means if everything is going right, I can be at peace. If everything is going my way, I can be at peace. That's peace that comes from the world. And I'm not saying that's all bad. Sometimes I like things to go right, and sometimes I just am at rest because they are going right. But the peace that Jesus gives is a peace that says when everything is going wrong, you still can be at peace because I'm in control. So he says, I don't give it as the world gives. And then he ends by saying, do not let your hearts be troubled. Don't get troubled about it. Don't get worked up about it. Don't let your hearts be troubled, nor be afraid. I'm in control. Will you trust me? Before church, my granddaughter came and met with me because she wanted to complain about her mom. And I like to listen to those stories. And one of the gals, Nellie and Archie, that Nellie was so impressed with her helping that Nellie gave her a gift certificate, not Charmin Charlie's, a place in the mall. Claire's. And I said, really? And I always, the other granddaughter, not Julie. And I always assure her that I'm going to go talk to Mom and give her a whooping and all that stuff. And she'd leave smiling and very happy. She really wished I would do it, by the way. So she is explaining to me that in children's church, she helped out. I said, when did she give it to you? She said, I got it a month ago, but my mom will not take me to Claire's in the mall. To which I said, really? Well, we're going to talk to your mom. So when she left, and we came back out here, when she left, she was beaming from ear to ear. Why? She no longer was worrying about the gift certificate in her purse because she knows that I made a commitment, and I don't think I've ever not fulfilled a commitment in her life. So she knows that somewhere between now and next Sunday, we're going to go to Claire's and we're going to spend her $20 and I'm going to take her to lunch and then I'm going to drive her back home. And she's totally at rest because what? Because she trusts me. She didn't ask me, how are you going to do it? She didn't say, what day exactly are you going to do it? She didn't say, what time are you going to do it? She didn't say, where are we going to have lunch? She didn't ask any questions. The fact that I said I will take care of it was in and of itself enough. How many times when God says, I've got your life. You gave me your life. Do you think I'm just going to let it run amok on you? You gave me your life. Trust me. But how many times we say, how are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? How's it going to happen? And God said, well, you just went from trusting to holding me in court, on the witness stand, giving answers. You cross the line of trust. Let me give you one other thing. When they go to Kadesh, Kadesh is the holy place. Kadesh is holy. God is leading them to the place of holiness. Psalms chapter 91, let me just read to you what that means. It says, he who dwells. He brought them to Kadesh, holy, to dwell, to stay, to dwell. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Rest. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest. There's that word again. In the shadow of the Almighty. That's a resting place, isn't it? I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. I can rest because I dwell and I trust. Surely he will save me from the fowler's snare, from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. That's an analogy of the great eagle, who protects its young with the feathers of its pinions. That's mentioned several times in the Psalms. It's the eaglet finding refuge in the wings of the eagle. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. Faithfulness because he cannot lie. You can take it to the bank. You will not fear the terror of night, the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. 1,000 can fall at your side and 10,000 at your right side, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. The analogy there is quite strong when he says 1,000 will fall at one side and 10,000 at the other. Why is the writer using an analogy like that? Why is the writer doing that? He's using an extreme. I don't expect 10,000 people to fall dead at my right side anytime soon. But he's using the most extreme example he can think of. He's saying, let your mind blow up with the worst of the worst of the worst. Think of whatever that might be in your life. He's saying, it may fall beside you, but it will never touch you. It will fall there. Remember the swale in the ocean? Remember, what did they focus on? Well, he's saying, if you dwell in the shadow of the Almighty, you will rest there because he's your refuge, because you trust him. So if it all falls beside you, pay it no mind and continue to rest. But if you focus on it, the writer did not say it would not fall beside you, did he? He said, though it fall, though it fall. Though it fall. It does sometimes. But if that becomes your focus, you step out of dwelling in the shadow of the Almighty. So here's the way it breaks down. I looked up the word. I just wanted to make sure I had it right. The word dwell, defined, is this. It's to remain for a time. It is to live as a resident. God invites you to live like he did the children of Israel. He brought them to Kadesh, to the place of holy where he dwells. He invites you to dwell where he dwells, under the shadow of the Almighty. He invites you to dwell where he dwells and to stay there. It's like this. If I told you I live, let's just say 1920 Reuben Street, and I told you I live there, that's my address, but I never go there. I haven't been home in 6 months. Do I dwell there? No, I don't. It might be a legal address. My mail might go there. My mail might dwell there, but I don't dwell there. A lot of Christians are like that. Well, I'm a Christian, but do you dwell? Is it just an address? Well, I live at 1920 Reuben Street, but I never go there. I've never been home. I haven't been home in 6 months. A lot of people are that way. They go to church. I'm a Christian. I go at Christmas. I go at Easter. But I don't dwell in the shadow of the Almighty. So if, using that analogy, if that's my address, but I don't dwell there, do I enjoy the perks of that address? Oh, now we're getting somewhere. Can I tell you that my address has a really nice swimming pool? And it has central air, and it has central heat, and it has pretty stuff inside. But I haven't been there, so I can tell you about my swimming pool, but I actually don't swim in it. I can tell you about the central AC. It's 105 here, and I can tell you that it has, but I'm sweating like a pig because I'm not dwelling there. So it's one thing to talk about the address. It's another thing to dwell at it. The psalmist said, he who dwells, not talks about it, he who dwells in the shadow of the Almighty can rest and not be afraid of pestilence, not be afraid of enemies, not be afraid of 10,000 falls at your right and 1,000 at your left. He who dwells can do that. But don't kid yourself. If you are not dwelling, you don't get the perks of the address. They only come to those who dwell. So God invites you. He invites me. He says, come come dwell in my zip code. Come dwell at my address, 77777. But there's an enemy out there who's also trying to get you to dwell in his address, 66666. It's funny, Deborah and I, we went to look, we were looking at apartments a while back. 2 weeks ago, we were looking at apartments. I went on a major apartment hunt, and Jennifer was helping me. We were calling all these places, and I was calling them and just determined I had to get this place, right? And I know the apartment business, and I know the game. Anyway, so they were telling me, this place, Country Club Estates, this place is wonderful. This place is, yeah, man. And I go, is there any crime there? What's your crime rate? How many 911 calls do you get a month? Oh, crime? They'd act like, what are you talking about? We don't even know what crime is here. And man, I drive up to the place, and it was ghetto city. I mean, barred up windows, those security screen doors on the front door, broken down cars in the driveway, and dirty diapers thrown all over the trees and bushes. And I'm going, well, let's take a look at the place. And I asked the question again. We were in a crime property for a while, and of course it got better. Long story there, but it all got better. But when we went there, it was crime. And I said, I really owe it to Deborah not to bring her back to one of those properties. We'd like to sleep at night without gunshots and things like that for a while. And so I asked again, so is there any crime here? Well, what crime are you talking about? Well, I'm looking across the parking lot, and there are two guys there with pit bulls that are fighting, and they're mugging on me like, what you looking at? And I'm thinking, that kind of speaks of crime to me when you got guys with fighting pit bulls fighting in the back of your parking lot. You can't do anything about it. I think there's crime. I love the ones that say, oh, man, we've got security here. We've got security gates. Really? Your security gate's a picket fence about that big that the kids have all kicked over and a car ran through it. That's not a security gate. Oh, and the big one. Again, what's your crime rate? Crime? What's that? Well, I show up on the property, but you got armed guards walking the property, and you don't know what crime is. The brochure always looks pretty good until you get there. In fact, they called me yesterday. I had an apartment complex call me yesterday. 2 weeks later, Mr. Mulvey, we're calling you. Are you still interested in that apartment? It happened to be the apartment with the pit bulls and the two guys. And I said, no, I think we're okay. I think we've got this covered. Please don't call me anymore. They're still trying to sell it. So God invites you. He invites you to stay. He invites you to stay, to dwell at 77777. He can't make you, but he invites. Dwell in the shadow of the Almighty. If you will rest, and I will cover you with my pinions, and there will be no harm that will come to you. But the devil is saying, but check this brochure out. I've got security, and I've got fence, and there's no crime. Check this. Come over to 66666. I even got leasing agents to try to paint a really good picture. Do you know the devil has leasing agents? They'll call you periodically. Are you happy with your address? Would you like to move? But where you dwell is completely up to you. You see, I can live not anywhere I want. If half of you today gave me an invitation to come live with you, I could pick and choose, couldn't I? Most of you wouldn't want me to live with you, but those that are dumb enough to extend it, I could pick and choose, right? You can choose where you live. God only invites. Come under the shadow of the Almighty. God invites, but he never can make you. You know, I was thinking about going back to the psalm that we opened with. I was thinking about that psalm where he says, I tested you. I tested you at Meribah. I tested you to see what you would do. It's an interesting thing. And let me just leave you with this. God never tempts, but he will test. He won't tempt you. The Bible's pretty clear. I tempt no man. If he tempted you, but Dad did that to his kids today. That dad should go to jail for child abuse. That's the dad that says, Johnny, don't step off the curb. You'll get hit by a car. Stay right there, Johnny. And he walks across the street and he goes, Johnny, come here. That dad should go to jail, right? God never tempts. God says it, and that's it. He never tempts, but he will test. Do you believe me enough to do it, is the test. Now, here's the difference. Remember this. The devil can't test. There's nothing in it for him, but he will tempt. God won't tempt. He tests. The devil can't test, but he will tempt. Did you see the brochure on My Nice Place? Would you like to come on and come to 666? Come to my zip code. It's a lot better. The brochure always looks good. But when you step outside of the shadow of the Almighty, where you can rest because his great pinions have covered you. You are there in the holy place, and you make a decision to go into another zip code. You only get the perks of where you dwell. Church, here's the challenge for you. Some of you, you're dwelling, and you've made it your home. But my guess is that there are some here today that you have not made it your dwelling place. Now, I'm not talking about City Church. I'm talking about God. You call it your address, but you haven't been home for quite a while. In fact, there's squatters in your house. You don't even know about it. By the time you get there, it's all going to be tore up. Don't call it your address if you're not dwelling. Dwell there. Dwell there. How do you do that? Well, you come to church. You get into his word. That's dwelling. I got so busy this last week. I reached a point about midweek. God said, you know what? You're talking the address, but you're not dwelling in it. I said, I can feel the effect, because the rest is leaving. The security is leaving. I don't feel the pinions protecting me. I'm talking about the address, and I'm the pastor. I'm talking about the address, but I'm over here at 66666, and I'm not reaping the perks of being under that address. So I had to say, whoa, I'm stopping my world for a hot minute. My world stops today. And I sat in my office and I said, I'm not preparing for a sermon this morning. I'm not doing this for anybody else's benefit. I'm going to open this book and do it for my own benefit. Right here, man. I said, God, I'm dwelling right now with you. Let's talk. I'm going to let you go first. And I started reading. And when I got all done, said, okay, I think, God, you said enough for me today. Now let me say some things to you. That's called praying. You can't pray without letting him talk back. They go hand in hand. And when those two are put together, that's dwelling. That's dwelling in the shadow of the Almighty. And I walked out of my office, and I walked out and said, I'm ready to go, man. I'm dwelling in the shadow of the Almighty. I'm ready to go. I face anything right now. Nothing can harm me. I'm all ready because I dwelt. Church can't do that for you. Church is a visit. Dwelling is what you do when you leave this building. It's what you do Monday. It's what you do Tuesday. I'd encourage you, stop your world for a minute. Put the cell phone on mute for a minute. Sit with God and dwell. The Psalms uses the term Selah. Selah means don't just read it and put it down and run. Selah means stop for a minute, think about it, and let it digest its way through you. That's dwelling. Right? Right? If I go to your house and we eat lunch and you're talking and I'm just eating, and when I'm done, go, there's no more food. Goodbye. Have we communicated? But how many of you know that you listen and you eat? Selah, you listen some more. Selah, you eat. You listen some more. And when you're all done, sometimes you just sit and enjoy the other person's company. That's dwelling. That's what dwelling is. And I'd encourage you to do that because that in itself is life-changing.